Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you to the Great Hall in Belfast's historic City Hall for the Northern Ireland Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration. My name is Paul Clark, and I'm honoured to lead these proceedings along with our Regional Ambassador for the Holocaust Education Trust, Molly Liggett. Holocaust Memorial Day is a time when we gather in our communities to learn the lessons of genocides so that we may be aware of the power and the impact of our choices today and tomorrow. For the past 2 years, COVID-19 has become part of our everyday language. It's changed the way we live our lives and will be with us for a long time to come. While much remains uncertain, we must all be responsible citizens. And that's why this year's Northern Ireland Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration is happening like this. In 1945, the newsreels revealed the ghastly images of the Holocaust from Auschwitz, Belsen, and Buchenwald. The world became aware of the full extent of the genocide. Millions died, and those who survived are now slipping over the horizon of living history. So it is now more important than ever that we, today's generation, be the custodians of their memory. We must never forget.
Holocaust Memorial Day is the International Day of Remembrance for the victims of the Holocaust and of the genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022 is One Day. This is chosen each year by the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. The 27th of January is one day that we put aside to come together to remember to learn about the Holocaust, Nazi persecution, and the genocides that followed in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur, in the hope that one day there may be one day in the future with no genocide. We learn more about the past, we empathise with others today, and we take action for a better future. Today, we are asking you to remember with purpose, learn from the past, and work for a world where one day there will be no more genocide. It is a sad fact of life that with each passing year, the Holocaust moves ever closer to the horizon of living history. We who remain must never forget. It is hard for us to imagine the Europe of the 1940s, Cambodia in the 1970s, Rwanda and Bosnia in the 1990s, and Darfur in the early 2000s. The brutality, the murder, the starvation, the disease. However, it is clear to us all that humanity has not learned the lessons from the past, and the risk of genocide and Holocaust persists. And so tonight, we remember those who perished in order to honour them and give their deaths meaning. Our commemoration now begins with the welcome address from Councillor Nicholl, Lord Mayor of Belfast City Council.
Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Belfast City Council, I would like to welcome you to this evening's commemoration as we gather online to remember the victims and survivors of the Holocaust and subsequent as well as current genocides. Holocaust Memorial Day is a reminder of a terrible atrocity, the horrors of which will continue to resonate. The theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022 is One Day. Survivors of the Holocaust and of genocide often talk about the one day when everything changed. The One Day theme reminds us of the 6 million people who had lives, families, hopes, aspirations, and dreams of their own, but who were ruthlessly murdered. It reminds us that many of them probably hoped for that one day when things would get better. Remembering the Holocaust and subsequent genocides provides a space to recall all those who suffered such unimaginable horrors. Holocaust Memorial Day exists to ensure that we remember, as well as inspiring us to be committed to facing, opposing, and exposing forms of hatred, prejudice, and discrimination. The Holocaust, as well as our own experiences here, has shown us that people are capable of unspeakable cruelty. We must have the courage to stand up to hatred and interrupt the process that can lead from words, prejudice, and threats to awful acts of violence and hatred. Remembering the Holocaust gives us an opportunity each year not only to recall and remember, but also to look at its legacy and its relevance for us in today's society. We should never forget how such events came about. We know that the Holocaust did not start with concentration camps. Remembering and learning from the Holocaust must go on, and we must continue to remember our responsibility and power to act and to interrupt expressions of hatred and other forms of prejudice that foster separation and hatred. The Holocaust and subsequent genocides illustrates the dangers of prejudice, discrimination, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, sectarianism, and dehumanization. It also raises important considerations about societal and individual motivations and what leads people to act as they do or to not act at all. It is important that we remember so that the awful atrocities that resulted from the Holocaust and recent generations are not lost, and that we can look forward to one day when there are no genocides.
And I welcome the First Minister, Paul Givan, and the Deputy First Minister, Michelle O'Neill, to the stage.
Well, good evening. It is my very great honour to join with you all for this very special event of contemplation and remembrance as we mark Holocaust Memorial Day 2022. Holocaust Memorial Day is a time for all of us to remember the millions of people killed in the Holocaust and also in the genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur. As each year passes, the poignancy and importance of the act of commemoration and remembrance becomes even more significant as survivors of the Holocaust become fewer and fewer. I believe that the testimony of survivors of the Nazi Holocaust, such as Eva Clark, who we'll hear from shortly, in which she tells the compelling story of her survival after her birth at the gates of a concentration camp in April 1945, play an important role in helping us to understand what happened and to learn vital lessons for society today. I'm also looking forward to seeing Teddy Dixon's film that will briefly tell the story of Teddy's time in the US forces when he was among the first to liberate the Dachau camp. What he witnessed left him haunted. Testimonies from Teddy, Eva, and those of other survivors must never be forgotten to ensure that future generations learn from these atrocities and the impact of what unchecked hatred and intolerance can lead to. I am pleased to say that Education Minister Michelle McElveen, on behalf of the Northern Ireland Executive, will be providing the necessary financial support to the Holocaust Educational Trust to deliver the valuable Lessons from Auschwitz programme again during the 2020 U to our young people. This is an important programme that will help ensure that we continue to learn from this terrible history and remind us all of our collective responsibility to take a stand against hatred and prejudice and to build an inclusive and shared society. The theme of Holocaust Memorial Day 2022 is one day. Through our acts of remembrance, we honour the survivors of the Holocaust and subsequent genocides and challenge ourselves to use the lessons of their experiences to ensure that one day in the future, such atrocities never happen again.
I'm very honoured to have been invited to take part on this very special occasion as we commemorate the victims of the Holocaust and the subsequent genocides. The Holocaust is a powerful reminder of what happens when prejudice and bigotry are allowed to go unchecked and unchallenged. And this event is an opportunity for us to remember all those who have suffered because of intolerance, of hatred, racism and bigotry. Holocaust Memorial Day is for everyone. People of all ages, of all faiths and none. People from all cultures, backgrounds and all walks of life. And it is now more important than ever, as prejudice and the language of hate are on the rise in so many places. This year's theme for Holocaust Memorial Day 2022, One Day, gives us the opportunity to reflect on some of the heartbreaking and the life-changing experiences of Holocaust and genocide survivors. For some Holocaust survivors, life changed in one day. For example, when they were put on a kinder transport train, or when they heard about the fate of their loved ones in a concentration camp. I am sure many still recall that one day they had to make the difficult decision to leave their own country and seek refuge in a foreign land. A desperate choice that sadly many vulnerable people are still having to make today in a bid to flee persecution, to flee war and poverty. For other Holocaust and genocide survivors, it was one day when a stranger or a kind neighbour risked their own life to save them. And hearing about such acts of courage and kindness remind us of the good in people and gives us a hope for a better and brighter future, free from prejudice and free from hate. On Holocaust Memorial Day, we learn from genocide. We learn about the importance of building a better future, and we reaffirm our commitment to building a society and a world that is free from prejudice, free from hatred and persecution, and where everyone's rights are upheld. We live in the hope that one day in the future, there will be no genocide, no prejudice, no hatred, or identity-based violence. That one day, everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs, will be able to live together in peace. Finally, I would also like to thank Belfast City Council members of the Holocaust Memorial Day Planning Group and others for once again making this event such a poignant and such a meaningful occasion. Thank you.
Now it's time to introduce a film talk by Eva Clark. The circumstances of the pandemic unfortunately mean that Eva cannot join us in person, although she has visited Northern Ireland many times in the past and hopes to come again in the future. Eva will share the compelling story of the one day of her birth, the 29th of April, 1945, at the gates of Mauthausen concentration camp.
Good evening, everybody. It is a great honour for me to have been invited by Belfast City Council to speak at this year's Holocaust Memorial Day event. My mother, Anke Bergman, would be proud to know her wartime experiences continue to be remembered in Northern Ireland. Since 2007, I've been warmly invited to speak to several schools at the Fermanagh County Museum and at the Ardoin Theatre in Enniskillen. Other venues visited were those in Omagh and Tyrone, Carrickfergus, Newton Abbey and Belfast. There are about 26 schools in total, but so too many to list individually. However, I'd like to mention three: Batora School in Enniskillen, Sullivan Upper School in Hollywood, Belfast, and Hazelwood Integrated College in Newton Abbey. I understand students from Hazelwood will be singing Somewhere Over the Rainbow this evening. One of the most memorable events for me when GCSE drama students from Batora School had written, produced and acted in several mini drama scenes reflecting some aspects of the Holocaust. These were so moving, but much to my surprise, the students made some alterations to the script following my talk and then proceeded to act out the new version. I like to think they passed with flying colours. In October 1948, my mother and I arrived in Harwich from Czechoslovakia via relatives in Holland. My stepfather, Karel Bergman, had come earlier to secure a home for us in Cardiff, South Wales. My mother and stepfather had married in Prague earlier that year. Their departure from Czechoslovakia was provoked by the communists having taken over the government, and although we arrived here legally, we might have been refugees, asylum seekers, or migrants. My biological father, Bernd Nathan, was German Jewish and came from Hamburg. He arrived in Prague in 1933, thinking that was far enough to be safe, but it wasn't. If he hadn't have done so, he wouldn't have met my mother, and I wouldn't be speaking to you today. My father had been an architect and interior designer, and my mother was a law student at the Charles University until the Nazis closed the Czech universities. They married on the 15th of May, 1940, already under Nazi occupation of Czechoslovakia. In November, December of 1941, my father was sent to Theresienstadt, the ghetto and concentration camp in Czechoslovakia, in one of the first transports from Prague, and Anka was deported shortly thereafter. Unknown to them, they were to spend the next 3 years in Terezín. This was an unusually long period of time and was due to the fact they were both young, strong, and well able to work. And my mother said luck had an awful lot to do with it. But at the end of September of 1944, their luck ran out when my father was sent to Auschwitz. And incredibly, my mother actually volunteered to follow him the very next day. She volunteered to follow him as she had no idea where he'd been sent. And being the eternal optimist, she thought they would survive. But tragically, she never, ever saw my father again, and heard from an eyewitness, a friend, soon after the end of the war, that my father had been shot dead on a death march near Auschwitz on the 18th of January 1945, and it was liberated by the Russian army on the 27th of January 1945, a week later. And that is why we commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January. When families first arrived in Terezín, the sexes were segregated. But nevertheless, in 1943, my mother discovered she was pregnant. When I asked her about this as a very curious teenager, she replied in a discreet way by saying that, although it was extremely dangerous, she and my father got together secretly, as and when they could, and to hell with the consequences. End of story. But it was not the end of the story, because those consequences proved to be very serious. As when the Nazis discovered my mother was pregnant, they made my parents sign a document saying that when the baby was born, he or she would have to be handed over to be killed. Except they didn't use the word kill, but the word euthanasia. My mother had never heard the word before and had to go and ask somebody what it meant. If you look it up in a dictionary, it'll say something like mercy killing. This wouldn't have been mercy killing. This would have been murder. In the event, my brother, Jiří, that means George, he was born in February of 1944. He was not taken away from my parents, but he died from pneumonia 2 months later. And his death meant my life and my mother's. Because had my mother arrived in Auschwitz holding my brother in her arms, she would have been sent straight to the gas chambers. But because she arrived there not holding my brother, and although she was pregnant again, this time with me, nobody knew. She knew, but nobody else knew, and it didn't show as it was very, very early on. So again, she lived to see another day. Anka was sent out of Auschwitz to a slave labor camp, an armaments factory in Freiburg near Dresden in Germany, because she was still considered to be strong enough for work. Unknown to her, she was to remain there for the next 6 months, from October 1944 to the end of March, beginning of April of 1945, becoming progressively more and more starved and more obviously pregnant. This was very dangerous for her, as upon discovery, she might have been sent back to Auschwitz to be killed. But luck was still with her when the factory was evacuated at the beginning of April. About 2,000 prisoners were put on a train, not cattle trucks this time, but coal wagons, open to the skies and filthy. My mother was on this nightmare of a train journey for 17 days, with no food and hardly any water. The train eventually arrived in Mauthausen, a beautiful village in Austria on the banks of the Danube near Linz. My mother always maintained the shock of seeing the name at the station provoked the onset of her labor, and I was born in the most dire of circumstances on a cart between the station and the camp. There are 3 reasons why we survived, and the first is a very chilling one. On the 28th of April 1945, the Nazis had run out of gas for the gas chamber. Well, my birthday is the 29th. So presumably, had the train arrived on the 26th or 27th, again, I wouldn't be here today. The second indirect reason was because Hitler committed suicide on the 30th. But the third and the best reason we survived is because on the 5th of May, the American army liberated the camp. Anka weighed 5 stone, or 35 kilograms, and I weighed 3 pounds, 1.5 kilograms. The theme for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is one day. Well, I hope you might agree that the day of my birth is bound to be my choice of a single day. 3 weeks later, when my mother was strong enough to travel, we were repatriated to Prague. Anka always said that arriving there was the worst aspect of her 3.5 years incarceration in camps, because up to then, she'd never allowed herself to think what might have happened to all the rest of her family. Eventually, Anka discovered her parents, sisters, nephew, my father, and most of the extended family had perished in Auschwitz. My mother always said she just had to get on with life, as she was the only person I had. And in fact, she said I gave her a reason for living. Starting a new life together and creating a new family unit was how my parents coped with the tragedy that had befallen both their families. My parents were so grateful to have been given the possibility of starting a new life in Cardiff. My mother lived very happily in Cardiff for over 60 years before she came to live with us in Cambridge, 3 years before her death in 2013, aged 96. When giving my talks, I always like to stress the reasons for doing so, the most important of which is, in my opinion, to try to counteract racism and prejudice, any form of racism and prejudice. I would like to end by saying that I very much hope to resume my visits to Northern Ireland, perhaps in 2023. My thanks and warmest good wishes to you all for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva, for joining us and for your work with schools in Northern Ireland in the past. We hope that you will return to continue having an impact on so many young people through your work to combat racism and prejudice. It is a fitting legacy to the bravery of people like your mother, Anka, who, like so many in the Holocaust and other genocides, face such suffering and loss. You inspire us to share those experiences.
The next film extract tells the story of Teddy Dixon. As a member of the Rainbow Division of the American Army, Teddy was one of the first servicemen to enter Dachau concentration camp in 1945. What he witnessed continued to haunt him throughout his life. It also compelled him to share his experiences, to educate others and combat hatred. We hope this film extract will be a fitting tribute to Teddy, who sadly passed away during 2020. We would like to welcome Teddy's son, Johnston, to introduce the film.
Sadly, my father, Teddy Dixon, died on the 20th November 2020, aged 100. In memory of him, I would like to share with you part of his story to continue his legacy. It is a legacy of people like him who witnessed the Holocaust and contributed to educating many about its horrors. This film is composed of clips from the documentary Belfast to Dachau, made in 2005. It tells of one day, April the 29th, 1945, which had a deep impact on my father.
My name is Edward Copeland Dixon. I was born in New York in 1920. And then in 1920, 1925, the family decided to come back to Ireland again. So we came back into Ireland in August 1925.
It's just a G.I. jive, man.
I had a good youth. Only the war spoiled it. Cut it short a bit.
Chunk all your junk.
Despite his 20 years in Belfast, he was still an American citizen and was drafted into the US Army.
It must have been early 44 when I got my draft card. Well, we didn't know what I was going in for. I thought when I would take my basic training, I might have a say in what I wanted to do, but I had no say. I just shifted us straight into the infantry.
It's just a G.I. jive.
So at the age of 24, and leaving a wife and young son back in Belfast, and with the Allies advancing across Europe, Teddy Dixon headed for a war that promised excitement and adventure.
Well, I was in Fox Company, 2nd Battalion, the 222nd Regiment, the Rainbow Division. That morning, we were told we're heading for Munich. So we got onto the trucks and we moved out. We came across to a small canal, so we had to get out there, and we got out and we moved into a bit of a wooded area, and there was a bit of a firefight. Yes, there was SS there. They were trying to escape, some of them had bicycles and all, so we opened up on them, and the whole thing, I would say, only lasted half an hour just. There was about 30 of them, and I would say there was, if there had been 7 to 10 left, that would have been all of them. That wee group there, there's about 4 or 5 there.
Teddy Dixon, pictured in the centre of this photograph, was one of the men to accept the surrender of the surviving SS guards. His squad then received orders to advance towards the next small town. It was the town of Dachau. For Teddy Dixon, it has been an emotional return to the camp. But by the end of his first day at Dachau, he would have a chance encounter for which he had been waiting 60 years.
Can you understand? Is this,
Yes.
is he a prisoner?
It's a person who was
A prisoner here? I was here at Liberation Day.
You too. Alors, le monsieur était ici aussi. You come from?
American Army, the Rainbow Division. The Regenbogen. The Rainbow.
Rainbow, donc c'est une division.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, I was here 60 years ago
Il était ici, il était là
today.
il y a 60 ans.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah, good.
Ah, ça c'est magnifique ça.
I'm glad you're able
Ça
to.
c'est bien ça. Ah, ça c'est
Yes.
formidable. Ça c'est formidable.
Good. Here today, 60 years ago today. I was here at Liberation Day. One of the first.
It's great to see.
Great, that's the first one I've seen.
What's your feeling? What's your feeling today?
I don't know, I feel like crying. See a man after all these years.
Ah, c'est magnifique.
It's great.
I that.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's good. I was glad that it sort of helped some of the survivors to be alive again. I'm just sorry that we weren't there maybe a year earlier for them. But it could have saved a whole lot of lives. But then when you start to think about it, when you come out of the army, you start to think about what had happened and all. You just wonder how anybody could do those things. It should be down in history towards trying to keep it from happening again. That type of, I know it has happened. It's happening in different countries today, but I think it should be let the younger generation know what had happened during the war.
As it stresses in the Statement of Commitment, we value the sacrifices of those like Teddy Dixon who have risked their lives to rescue victims as a touchstone of the human capacity for good in the face of evil.
And I call on the Reverend David Cale to introduce a piece of music to be played by the Lowry String Quartet. It's entitled Ani Ma Amin, which holds a very special place in the Jewish community as it was composed on a train to Auschwitz-Birkenau.
The famous Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon set out the 13 principles of the Jewish faith. Each one begins with the words Ani ma'amim, I believe, be'emuna shalema, with perfect faith. Here is the true story of one tune set to these words that has survived. Inside the crowded cars, over the clatter of the cattle cars' wheels, rose a sound of people gasping, sighing, weeping, and dying. One could hear the stifled cries of children crushed together. But in one such car, headed towards the infamous death camp of Treblinka, the sound of singing could be heard. Azriel David Fastig, the cantor of the Meditza Rebbe, was singing these words to the tune he had composed. Ani ma'amim, I believe, be'emuna shalema, with perfect faith, bevias haMoshiach, in the coming of the Mashiach, va'af al pi, and even though sheyisma mea, he may delay, im kol zeh, still, acher lo bechol, I wait for him yom every day, sheyovo, that he, and I am certain that he will come. Rab Azriel David Fastag was noted for his exceptional voice throughout Warsaw. Gradually, the listening ears of those around him joined his song. At first, quietly, but gradually growing louder and louder. Soon the song spread from car to car. His eyes were red with crying. Cantor Fastig tore a piece from his shirt, jotted down the notes from his new composition, and then he proclaimed, I will give half my share to the world in the world to come, to the person who will take my song to Meditza Rebbe. A silence descended upon the train. Then two young men appeared, promising to bring the song to the Rebbe at any cost. They jumped out of a hole that they had made in the train's roof. One was killed as he jumped, but the other miraculously survived, and clutching the shirt, kept the melody alive. It was on Yom Kippur after the war, and the Meditza Rebbe's synagogue in New York was filled to capacity. As the Rebbe began singing the Ani Ma'amim, the crowd wept bitterly, and the Rebbe trembled and declared, on their journey to the gas chambers, this song was born from the ashes of millions.
An important aspect of Holocaust Memorial Day is to raise awareness of other genocides. And we ask you to reflect carefully now as you watch this short film. It was created by the Remembering Srebrenica Northern Ireland group.
26 years ago, the world watched as on the 11th of July, Srebrenica fell, and in the following days, over 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men were separated from their loved ones and murdered simply on account of their identities. Across Bosnia and Herzegovina, tens of thousands of men, women and children were tortured, killed and detained in concentration camps, with others forced to flee their own homes. Mass graves are still being discovered even as late as this year. Thousands of families still are searching for their missing loved ones. This was a campaign of genocide against the Bosnian Muslims during the Bosnian War, which turned previously integrated communities against one another. Every year, Remembering Srebrenica selects a theme that reflects an aspect of the genocide that must be commemorated, but also speaks to the communities here in the UK. The theme for 2021 is Rebuilding Lives. Our theme this year, Rebuilding Lives, focuses on the remarkable ways that survivors of the Bosnian genocide continued to fight for justice. We seek to recognise the lessons that we are all able to learn from Srebrenica and highlight the work taking place in both the UK and abroad, so future generations may move forward with hope and celebration of diversity and differences. We have seen the positive impact that commemorating Srebrenica in the UK can have in terms of bringing people together to reflect on the importance of tackling hatred and intolerance, and the theme for 2021 will no doubt go a long way in empowering individuals with the skills and knowledge to not only stand up to hatred, but also help in building stronger, more cohesive communities for all. One such example is in Northern Ireland.
Rebuilding lives, rebuilding trust is exactly what we're trying to do here in Northern Ireland. As is happening in Bosnia, we're trying to build a sustainable peace in both regions in an area where there is significant community tension and community division still, which is driven by religion, identity and many other things. There are so many similarities and significant challenges in Bosnia that are also relevant in Northern Ireland. We helped to facilitate with Belfast City Council a visit by the president of the Mothers of Srebrenica, Manira Sibazic. She spoke to so many people at different events, and everybody was struck by how the challenges are similar and how we have so much to learn from each other, both in Bosnia and here in Northern Ireland. Whenever young people here look at the legacy of conflict as there is in Bosnia, they can't help but come back to Northern Ireland understanding why it is critically important to stand up to prejudice and discrimination, why it's really important to support diversity. And I suppose they understand that relationship dismantles prejudice, and that's true in Bosnia just as it is in Northern Ireland.
Mid and East Antrim Council, we're delighted to work in partnership with Remembering Srebrenica UK and the NI. 17 young people benefit from the first phase of the programme and travelled to Bosnia, and they had a very impactful and powerful experience during that visit. I hope the young people will recognise their role as peace builders. Indeed, one of the aspirations we would have is that they can take that learning and make a difference in their own communities on their return. As a mother of 5 sons myself, I could only begin to imagine the pain and the suffering the mothers endured through the loss of their sons, husbands, brothers. It's encouraged me as a volunteer in my own community to try to make some positive change and develop more around the work of integration and cross-community contact.
I met with Nicholl from Belfast City Council at a peace wall, barriers which have been put up to separate nationalist Catholic neighbourhoods from unionist Protestant neighbourhoods. Nicholl was responsible for bringing Manira, president of the Mothers of Srebrenica, to visit Belfast around a year ago.
Northern Ireland and Bosnia have so many similarities in terms of being post-conflict countries that we felt it was imperative that really just hearing from a film wasn't going to be enough, but to actually hear Manira in person would be very impactful. I think the biggest lesson that we can actually look at Bosnia for us here from Northern Ireland is how easy it is to lose peace. I think if you look at the different steps towards genocide, And I think we should be very grateful that we've never actually gone as far as what happened in Bosnia. Just because there are peace walls here and there you can count the physical, there's also a number of invisible barriers. A road can be a barrier where people who live there maybe think that they can't cross. And I would say probably in Bosnia there are examples of that as well. So sometimes the barriers can also be psychological.
I'm here at Stormont to meet with Permanent Secretary of Department of Education, Mark Brown.
I think Bosnia and Northern Ireland in rebuilding lives and rebuilding peace do have many similar difficulties. I think it's important that every generation learns about good relations and how to live and get on with people from different backgrounds, different cultures and with different views. We also have to learn from the past in order to try and ensure that the terrible events that happened at Srebrenica with the genocide and all the violence that went with that doesn't happen again in the future. And that young people and others realise that these terrible events start from very small events. They start from intolerance, they start from small acts of disrespect and then can build up into much more serious events. The work of remembering Srebrenica is critical in keeping all of those events to the forefront of our minds.
In July 2020, Remembering Srebrenica planted a tree on the grounds of Stormont in remembrance of the victims of the genocide. This was supported by the 5 main political parties across the community divide.
I'm here at Stormont today to meet with leading politicians Declan Kearney and Doug Beattie. Declan is MLA and Junior Minister at the Executive Office, and Doug Beattie is newly elected Party Leader of the UUP, MLA and former peacekeeper in Bosnia.
I was very privileged, in fact, to be part of the ceremony last year and to make a small contribution, a modest contribution, on behalf of the Executive, on my own behalf, my family's behalf and on behalf of my party. It's important for us in this place to be able to show solidarity, to share in the remembrance of that event. We have been able to make connections in relation to our shared experiences, our shared suffering, and also with regard to the shared future that we need to shape within our respective settings. And we have so much to learn from one another.
Identity and culture can be so much enriching, but it can drive division as well if we're not careful. And Northern Ireland has to learn the lessons, not just from our own past, but from what has happened around the world, and particularly in places like Bosnia-Herzegovina and Srebrenica, because identity politics can just put a wedge between communities. And we in Northern Ireland can learn lessons from this, but at the same time we can reach to other nations and they can learn lessons from what we have done as we reach out the hand of friendship to people who may have been our enemies in years gone by.
Now, to help all of us to remember the victims of the Holocaust and other genocides, we're going to read the Statement of Commitment. It was adapted from the Declaration of the Stockholm Conference, which was signed by governments from around the world, and it pledges remembrance of the Holocaust and support for education and research to ensure future generations will learn its tragic lessons. A cross-section of people from across Northern Ireland will read part of the statement. We're now going to have Ariel and Anaya Davis, Owen Miller, Claire Boylan, Ziza Munyangaju, Tamsin McMullen, Adi Fekete, Amelia Clark, and Alexandra Rossbottom to lead us. And the Statement of Commitment reminds us of our responsibility as individuals to stand against the attitudes and actions which allow the evils of Holocaust and genocide to happen.
We recognise that the Holocaust shook the foundations of modern civilization. Its unprecedented character and horror will always hold universal meaning.
We believe the Holocaust must have a permanent place in our nation's collective memory. We honour the survivors still with us and reaffirm our shared goals of mutual understanding and justice.
We must make sure that future generations understand the causes of the Holocaust and reflect upon its consequences.
We vowed to remember the victims of Nazi persecution and of all genocides.
We value the sacrifice of those who have risked their lives to protect or rescue victims as a touchstone of the human capacity for good in the face of evil.
Sunt conștiență că lumea încă mai se marchime. Viața manușanghi, varinel mai țăra să la verenghi, pe motive că considerăm că de rasă, religie sau că nasoare, sau că orientarea sexuală.
Genocide, anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia and discrimination still continue. We have a shared responsibility to fight these evils.
We pledge to strengthen our efforts to promote and research about the Holocaust and other genocides. We will do our utmost to make sure that the lessons of such events are fully learned.
As we commemorate together in our homes across Northern Ireland and beyond, please join me for the final pledge and say, we will continue to encourage Holocaust remembrance by holding an annual UK Holocaust Memorial Day. We condemn the evils of prejudice and discrimination. We value a free, tolerant, and democratic society. We have come to that part of our evening where our thoughts focus especially on remembrance of those who perished in the Holocaust and other more recent genocides. I invite Walter Sekulis, whose grandparents were interned as enemy aliens in a gulag in Kazakhstan, and on arrival to Northern Ireland, to light the candle in memory of those victims. If you could, please stand for the commemoration. I would now like to invite Carl Nelkin from the Dublin Jewish community to sing a prayer for the repose of the souls of the departed in Hebrew, after which the Reverend David Keel will read the prayer in English.
El Molei Rachamim Shochen Mamramim Hameseh Menuchonachano Al Kanfei Hashchino B'malos Kedoshim Taharim Kezohar Orokiya Masirim Es Nishmas Achenu B'nei Yisrael HaKedoshim HaTaharim Shenaflu B'dei Arotzchim V'nishpach Damam Ba'Auschwitz Meidanek Treblinka Uvishar Machanos Hashmad Be'Europa Shener שנשחטו, ושנשרפו, ושנטבעו, ושנחנקו על קידוש השם. בעבור שכל הקדוש הזה מתפללים ביד אזכרת נשמתם. בגן עדן תהיה מנוחתם, לכן בנו רחמים. יתירם בססר כנופך ליעלמים. וצרור בספר החיים את נשמתם, אדוני הוא נחלתם. וינוחו על משכבתם בשלום, ונאמר
O God, full of compassion, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and pure ones, who shine like the glow of the firmament. For the souls of the holy and pure ones, who were killed, murdered, slaughtered, burned, drowned and strangled in Auschwitz, Shilmano, Treblinka, Sobibor, Majdanek, Bijets, and Mali Trotsonets, for the sanctification of the name through the hands of the German oppressors. The whole congregation is praying on their behalf in remembrance of their souls. May their resting place be in the Garden of Eden. May the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shelter of his wings for eternity, and may he bind their souls in the bond of life. The Lord is their heritage, and may they repose in peace on their resting places. And let us all respond, Amen.
And let us all respond, Amen. Olivia Marx Waldman is the Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. And she is now going to read We Remember Them by Sylvan Kamins and Rabbi Jack Reamer.
In the rising of the sun and in its going down, we remember them. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we remember them. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. In the blueness of the sky and in the warmth of summer, we remember them. In the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. In the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joys we yearn to share, we remember them. So long as we live, they too shall live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them.
To close our event, a chamber choir from Hazelwood Integrated College will sing the piece, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. This was written by Jewish composer Harold Arlen and lyricist Yip Harburg in the 1930s. With its theme of yearning for a better world one day, it is a fitting way to end our ceremony. Due to the impact of COVID-19, this recording was done in Hazelwood Integrated College rather than the City Hall. A grateful thanks to those in the college who helped with the last-minute backup filming. Following this, the Reverend David Cale will blow the shofar to symbolise the end of our act of commemoration.
Troubles melt like lemon drops away above the chimney tops. That's where you'll find me. That's where you'll find me. Somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly, bluebirds fly.
Let us learn from genocide for a purpose, to build a better future. Let us speak out when we see injustices, prejudices, and identity-based hatred. Let us focus on working together towards a world where one day there will be more peace and justice. Let us learn more about the past, empathise with others today, and pledge to take action for a better future.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, that brings our commemoration to an end this evening. Thank you for your participation. We hope that it has been a fitting remembrance for all the victims of the Holocaust and of more recent genocides. Good evening and shalom.